All right, good morning, everyone. We are here in week 3 of our contract deep dive. We were having a little conversation before we got started as people were joining about the importance of the contract being correct because we were bringing up a couple of different examples where because the agent didn't pay enough attention to the contract, they ended up putting their client in a situation where they lost significant amount of money. $5, $10,000, like a lot, right? So we want to be aware that we don't want to put our clients in that situation. So we are going to talk today. If I share my screen here, we're going to do the little funky me standing in front of the screen because I think that's fun. All right. Can y'all see my deck? Awesome. I'm going to make you small enough so that I can see what is happening. So today we're going to do special stipulations. And it's timely that we have the conversation about agents messing things up and not giving their clients the right level of accuracy and support as we talk about special stipulations, because special stipulations is probably, in my opinion, the worst or the best, let's call it that. It's the best opportunity for you to screw up. So it really is an area where you can create all kinds of havoc because you're doing significantly more than, of course, filling in the blank. So it's one of the things that we need to pay close attention to. All right, so let's talk about 5 tips for writing your own special stipulations. Number 1, don't repeat something that's already in the contract. Okay, now, this sounds stupid, right? Like you're like, wait, that's dumb. Like, of course I wouldn't repeat. Nope, happens all the time. People write stuff in special stipulations that the contract already addresses, and now you have conflicting language. And remember when we talked about the purchase and sale agreement, what language drives? The pre-printed text in the contract or the special stipulation?
Special stipulation.
Special stipulation. The special stipulation is what drives, right? Because that's what you're adding to the contract. So if the pre-printed text says it properly and your special stipulation says it wrong, you're in trouble because you've now just overwritten functional text. So don't repeat things that are already in the contract. That's why you should read the whole contract like we did, and make sure that you know what all those extra paragraphs are about. Number 2, use a pre-written stipulation if you can. Okay, this is a big one, right? Because now effectively you're just doing a fill in the blank like you were with the rest of the contract. Because someone else has written this special stipulation, hopefully an attorney, and you can use it from there. If you don't have a pre-written one, ask an attorney friend to write one for you. They will most attorneys that you work with on even semi-regular basis are more than happy to write a special stipulation for you. You send them and say, hey, I need it to do this and this and this. Please write the stipulation. The chances of that being a good stipulation are higher. I don't say perfect because there are attorneys out there that don't write great stipulations. But generally speaking, an attorney should write a much better stipulation than a real estate agent probably would. Not all,
Yeah,
but
I would add, sorry to
go
interrupt,
ahead.
but broker support. I would go to broker support and we will have the attorney write the special stipulation for you. I would go through that before going to a different attorney.
So yeah, and that's use an attorney that we have a connection with or that you have a connection with. That's usually the best way to do it, and we'll address that in just a minute. Tina's jumping ahead, which is typical for her, but that's okay. It's good.
Don't go, well, I'm sorry, I'm disagreeing with you. Like it's under the broker's contract. It's the broker's contract at the end of the day. So
It
if
is.
you have something that you don't know how to complete, or there's not a special stipulation, or we don't have a custom special stipulation for it, I would go through broker support. I wouldn't
Yep.
contact an attorney directly because it's not the attorney that's responsible at the end of the day.
That is true. That is true. It is your broker, the ultimate top of the food chain in your brokerage, that is responsible for that. So that is important. If you do have to write your own because you've decided not to do that, but we'll get to why a pass through to that in a second. Make sure that it includes the who, what, when, and what if in your stipulation. So here's the thought process in a stipulation. You need to make sure who you indicate who is doing it, what they're doing, when they're doing it by, and what happens if they don't do it. Now, this is the biggest thing that gets left out. A lot of times people think that, oh, I can just write a quick step that says seller's going to cut the grass before closing. Okay. What happens if the seller doesn't cut the grass before closing, right? And when before closing? Like, are we talking like tomorrow? Or are we talking 30 days from now? Well, they'd be in violation of the contract, right? That would be a default. Yes. But that puts you into one option: terminate the contract and get your earnest money back. But that's not necessarily your best option because the seller didn't cut the grass, right? So in that particular case, you could say if it has not been cut, if it's not cut within 4 days prior to, what is it? Let's say 4 to 6 days prior to closing, then the seller shall pay landscaper X $150 or whatever. Now, that you notice gets real complicated real fast, right? So it's important that you're paying attention to those aspects of the special stipulation. So the who's going to be doing it, what is specifically that you want to get done, when you want to get it done by, and what happens if it doesn't get done. Just to reiterate, those are the four components of a functional special. The last but not least, which Tina is talking about over and over again, whether you write it or you got it from somewhere, because I know agents pass around special steps all the time. Uh, Make sure that if you're using one that doesn't come from one of the sources that we're going to talk about here in a second, that you make sure to have the broker review it. And for us at Remax Metro Atlanta and Remax Center, that means going through broker support. And all you have to do is email it to us, and we will look at it and get right back to you. That's what we're here for. Feel free to call and talk through it. It's all good. That's what we're here to help. But make sure you have that review done before, this is important, before it becomes part of the contract. I hate it when agents come to me and they're like, hey, what do you think about this step? It's got a couple of issues. Let's get it fixed. Oh, well, we already executed the contract. Oh, well, now you're going to look silly because you're going to have to go to your client and say, we need to do an amendment because this is not right. Or if it's bad enough that the other party is going to win out of it, you might not get them to agree to change it, right? Because you ask for something and you think you got something, but you didn't really. And so now, are they really going to give you what you really want? Well, probably not. So just things to think about. Again, make sure you're using those pre-written ones. There are pre-written ones for a whole lot of things. Let's talk about these special stipulations, these few here as an example. So unmute and make sure that you can engage here for a second. Seller to repair items 1, 4, 7, and 13 from the inspection report. Good, bad, what's missing?
Everything.
Yeah,
Everything. I mean, it does say the seller is going to do it. Do we know what items 1, 4, 7, and 13 are?
No.
No, right? So we need to maybe attached inspection report might be a way to improve that. And then there's all kinds of other issues when you're talking about repairs, right? So things to consider there. Seller to provide condo docs. This is one of my favorites that I see in my condo guy, Adam, is adamantly shaking his head there. So Adam, tell us what's wrong with this one.
What kind of condo docs are you talking about?
Wait a minute, they're not just called condo docs?
I know.
I thought that's what they were called. So, yes, be specific as to what you're asking about. The phrase condo docs, while we as agents might throw that around, and generally some of us know what we're talking about, but again, that's open to interpretation. I might think you're talking about these documents, and Adam probably thinks you're talking about these documents, and none of us know for sure what you're really talking about if that's what you say, right? Seller to have property cleaned before closing. There's two
By
things
who?
wrong with this one. What's the number one thing that's wrong with this?
What is cleaned? Who's it
Nope.
cleaned by?
And how
So
many days before closing? Because if they do it like 3 weeks before, then it doesn't really
okay,
matter that they cleaned.
those are definitely issues with this one. But remember, the number one tip was don't repeat stuff that's already in the contract. If you remember from our review of the 2025 purchase and sale agreement, it says that the property is going to be delivered in a clean state. Not, it doesn't use the phrase broom clean anymore. Now, if you want to have the property professionally cleaned, that's a very different statement than just cleaned because the contract already says that it's going to be cleaned. So this is where you got to look at, am I repeating something that's already in the contract? Am I asking for something specific enough that's valuable? And of course, all the other details, as you guys mentioned, the timing and all of that kind of stuff. Seller to bring garage door opener to closing.
It's already in the contract.
Already in the contract. Adam's good on that one.
Not
That
going to
one
get me on that
absolutely,
one, Brett.
that one absolutely is already in the contract. So what else would you might be missing? Because this says garage door opener. Do you understand that that is the wrong language? It should say openers that they have, which is what it spells out in the contract, right? Because whether you have two or three or five or whatever, you're supposed to bring them all. You can't just bring one. This says I just have to bring one. I get to keep the other ones. So again, don't mess up your original contract by putting things in. Seller to leave all appliances. I mean, come on. Like that's not that, yeah. I don't even think we have to talk about that one. Oh, and this is one of my faves. Seller to provide home warranty for buyer at closing not to exceed $500. So I go out and get a home warranty that is for critical failures only, and it is $120. Does that count? Sure does, according to this warranty. I mean, this special step. Be specific. You're not getting your buyer what you think you're getting them if you don't be specific. Okay. All right. So let's talk about where do we find these pre-written steps because that is where we want to start, right? Like we want to do pre-written steps 99% of the time. I promise there are steps out there for everything you could probably imagine. It is rare that we have to write one from scratch. It typically means that we're in a really bizarre situation versus the ability to go through all of the things. So there's 108 steps roughly in the GAR contracts. We will go through quite a few of them here. If you've ever had the Red Book class, which I am not affiliated with that class or that organization or that author who happens to be Seth Wiseman, who happens to write the GAR contracts for the Georgia Association of Realtors. But it's a really good class. And it's a really good book. If you need access, your broker probably has one that you can come in and look at. And if you're looking for steps, there are literally, I mean, I would imagine there are 1,000+ steps in that book, like it, and because it's 2 books. So it's a lot. So just things to think about. There are lots of pre-written steps out there probably, and I know this is shocking, it's not, whatever situation you're in is not unique to you and your client. It probably has happened before. Maybe not for sure, but probably. So let's take a look and see what we can find from those. All right, so let's look at a few. Expiration of time deadlines. What if you wanted deadlines to not expire at midnight or 11:59? Because God help us all, who wants to sit up until 11:59? I do find it kind of funny that AM is on here as an option, because holy God, if your deadlines ended at 8 a.m., whoosh, that would be brutal. I think that'd be worse than 11:59, at least me personally. But this is a step that agents often want to be able to use, so I will lead with it. All deadlines, special step 627, expiration of time deadlines, all time deadlines set forth herein shall expire at such and such number, AM or PM, on the day of the deadline. So that would apply to everything. Now, here's the thing to think about for this. There are a couple of deadlines, if you remember from the purchase and sale review, that have specific times that they expire. And so it is important to understand that this overrides all deadlines. It does not say that there is a deadline that is different. And so you got to be a little bit careful with that. Okay. Divorce contingency. If your listing, your sellers are going through a divorce and you don't put this contingency, this special stipulation in, what happens if they can't close? Do you know?
Can you say that again?
If your sellers are going through a divorce and you don't put this stipulation in the contract, what happens if they are still mired in the divorce when the closing comes around and they aren't allowed by law to close that property? Can the buyers sue them? They have a valid contract for the sale of that property. So they absolutely could sue them for specific performance. Now, here's the issue, right? Like in reality, you should work that out. And in theory, your buyer should know that this is part of the issue with this property, just like if it were a probate or a whatever. So you just want to make sure that you use something like this to help protect your sellers in this case. Conformed copy of agreement. Please, please, please don't do conformed copies of agreements if you don't like absolutely have to. Like if maybe you're dealing with an agent that still faxes you things and hand writes everything, and so now you can't read it, and you want to do a conformed copy, fine. But use this stipulation in the conformed copy, because what that says is that the original offer is the thing that controls. It's not this one, because you never know what difference is going to be. I was just working with an agent the other day. They were going back and forth in a negotiation, and they were like, for the final thing, we're just going to send you a whole fresh contract. And I was like, okay, I guess that means I'm going to have to read the whole thing again, because I want to make sure you didn't change anything else and not tell me, right? So we want to make sure that you're paying attention to the details there. Adam, go ahead.
Brett, can you share with the team your opinion? And I guess this relates to the first special stip that's on here. Maybe I'll share my opinion first, and you can tell me what you think.
Sure.
But I get so frustrated when agents write in this whole special stip about deadlines being business days, and if it lands on a weekend, you don't count weekends, this and that, or a holiday. I'm of the opinion of ask for the number of days you think you need based off of looking at a calendar versus putting in all that crazy language. Um, do you have an opinion on that?
I could argue that either way. I was one of those listing agents that often would put in that weird stipulation. that would knock it all out. In fact, I've had agents that were friends of mine yell at me. We'd get under contract and they'd be like, dude, I didn't see that. Well, that's not my fault. Like you should read the special stipulations in a contract before you have your client sign it. And so I can say, whatever you do, make sure that you communicate it. Okay. Make sure that you're making it clear and try to keep it simple, right? That's the phrase that I would say is keep it simple. You'll notice that this expiration of time deadlines is very simple. There's not a lot of fluff. There's not extra language about including or excluding or anything else. It's just very straightforward. And so I think it's important that you keep it simple. To Adam's point, if you can look at a calendar, hey, I know I'm going to go under contract in the next day or 24 hours or whatever. And lo and behold, there's a holiday on Monday. Okay, great. So let's just add an extra day. Let's just, you just gotta pay attention to the calendar. You gotta pay attention to the time of day that you're doing it, right? An agent the other day, we were doing a contract negotiation with them, and they were like, well, we want 7 days, and the seller wanted 5 days, and they ended up agreeing on 6 days, right? Which sounds like a split in the middle, but the contract was bound at like, I don't know, 6 o'clock at night. That's day zero. The next day is day one. Their first day is now shorter than it would have been if they had bound early in the morning. So they really only got 5 days-ish. So again, you got to pay attention to the times. You got to pay attention to the calendar, as Adam pointed out, because regardless of whether you have the worst is when you're during like super holiday season, whether it's Thanksgiving or December with all the different holidays. You really just have to pay attention to those sorts of things. The other thing is you have to take into consideration is there are parts of our city that have people that observe strictly no business on Sundays. And so if you're working with someone, whether it's your client or another agent that has no function on Sunday, business on Sunday, you're going to have to take that into consideration. So does that kind of answer your general question there, Adam?
It does. And another
Without giving you my opinion directly, did you like how I went around that?
Yeah, and then I had an offer a few weeks ago where it's for due diligence. Due diligence, it said 7 BD.
Yes, we talked about that in the previous sessions where writing BD doesn't mean anything. Nobody, that's not a legal term. You have to spell out business days, or you have to say somewhere that BD means business days, right? Because that's just, yeah. Or remember, the contract also identifies BD as banking days. So, even though the definitions of both of those are very, very similar, they're not the same. So you want to be careful with that. So, all right, moving on to one of our favorite topics lately. It's is compensation. So I figure why not address the elephant in the room? Let's go ahead and look at these pre-written stipulations. We've talked about, and we will talk more about the other ways that you can do this, but these special stipulations are a viable way for you to write in that the buyer is asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker at closing. You will note this is very, very specific language. And there's a paragraph at the end that you don't want to leave out that says nothing herein shall be interpreted as a request to alter, modify, or change the commission to be received by the seller's broker, if any, that seller may have agreed to pay by seller's broker in any separate written agreement. Why does it say that? Anybody know? If you try to change someone's existing contract that you're not a party to, that is I wish Chris was on here, he would correct me, but I think it's called a tort something. Anyway, there's a legal term for it, and it's basically against the law. Like you cannot modify someone else's contract. And so this paragraph protects you from accidentally doing that. So if you're using a special step to ask for your buyer's broker's compensation paid by the seller on behalf of the buyer, which is the right way to phrase that, then you want to use the whole step. Now, obviously, there's the VA one, which is a little bit stronger language because, of course, the VA, although I imagine that might change, who knows, but it's one of those things that you be clear about what you're asking for. Any questions on this without diving into the compensation realm? Because that's not this class. We will have a class on that. All right. Closing date extensions. Buyer may extend the date of closing for up to blank days upon notice of the seller or by paying seller additional consideration of blank amount of money. The additional consideration shall or shall not be applied towards the purchase price at closing if the buyer closes upon the purchased property. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Does anybody ever use this one? Have you ever seen a situation where you might want to use this one? What if the buyer travels a lot for work and unexpectedly has to go into 2 or 3 day absences? Maybe you need to give them an extra period of time. Maybe they just know that there's potentially going to be some issues. Again, there's a special step for almost any situation, even ones that you think are kind of silly and may never happen. So that's why I think that's an important one to have. The amendment to address concerns as notice to terminate. This is an interesting one. It's actually, and I'm not even sure I updated this one. We'll look in a second. But basically, this is saying that if the amendment to address concerns that's presented is not accepted by the seller, then it's automatically terminating the contract. So be careful with that one because anytime contracts automatically terminate, you got to be careful of what you're doing. But Adam, remind me when we flip over to the actual GAR steps as we scroll through them to look at 302 because I think that one may have updated and I forgot to update it, which happens. Repair of defects not found due to seasonal issues. Hello, we are in a weird season at the moment where most days, it was 85 degrees in Cancun. So, you could test the air conditioning, but probably not the heat. And vice versa, if it's, like it was here, 30 something earlier. Lord, you're not really going to test the air functionally. They're not going to turn it on if it's under 60 outside. They shouldn't. So what happens if the AC doesn't work when it gets warm and you turn it on, right? So this paragraph addresses those things. Now, it's a limited time period after the closing date, okay? So you have to be careful with those sorts of things. Repair or replace named items after closing. Seller's obligation survives. Remember, it's important to note whether something survives the contract closing or not. Seller warrants that the following items, which the buyer is unable to inspect, shall be in good and working order for a period of blank days from the date of closing. What would this possibly be? Does anybody remember a few years ago when there was really hard to get appliances? You'd go to order an appliance. I had to replace a dishwasher during that time period. And my parents were driving up from Louisiana, and I was able to find my same dishwasher in a Best Buy in Hammond, Louisiana. And my parents drove by, curbside picked it up, and drove it up here to Georgia because we could not find one here, and they wouldn't ship it. Like they wouldn't transfer it to this store because there was such a shortage of product at that time. if I was doing that as a seller and delivering that after the closing date because there was a shortage of appliances, wouldn't you want the buyer to have some opportunity to ensure that it's working and it's correct, right? So that's what this one goes with. Repairs by seller after loan approval, extend closing date. So this one's an interesting thing that protects the seller, because if you think about, okay, this particular buyer wants these repairs done. They're going to cost X amount of money. But if the finance contingency is still out there, loan approval is not done yet, then why wouldn't I save myself the ability to not have to pay for those, because they might not be things that the next buyer wants. Now, obvious things like hole in the roof and whatever, you're going to want to fix, right? But there are types of repairs that some buyers want and some buyers don't, right? And so why would you waste money on that if they aren't moving forward? So this gives you the opportunity to talk to that, and it extends closing if necessary because of the time taken. So like anytime, again, when you add these types of special stipulations, what's happening to the contract's complexity? It's going up, right? Like it's getting more complex. And so going back to our keep it simple, a clean contract is always better than a complex contract. Making sure that it has the minimal amount of language in it is ideal. There's just so many things that are better about that. So just be aware, don't overuse special stipulations. We'll look at a whole list of them here in a second, and you'll see that there's just so many. Then the repairs made by the seller during the transaction, you can go ahead and throw this in there. That says that they have to get any required permits or certificates of completion for the repairs up front. You can get a septic system clearance letter if you're working on a septic property, buying a septic property. It's a really good idea to get a clearance letter and of course get it inspected, that sort of thing. Structural engineer's written opinion, seller to provide it. If you're looking at a property and it looks like it might have some potential structural issues, throw this in there, right? Like, let's make sure that it's actually correct and not an issue. We don't typically deal with this one here in town, but those of you that are out in the larger lotted areas, let's call it land versus lots, what if it's less size, right? You're advertising a property that's 5 acres, and lo and behold, you do the survey, and it's 4.5. Well, that's not a 5-acre lot, right? Like, that's not the same. So make sure you mark if that's important to you, which it could be, because, for instance, if you need a certain number of acres in order to be able to have horses, for example, in most counties in Georgia, there's a specific number of acres that you have to have in order to have horses. So if you think you're buying a lot that's say that number's 5 acres, and all of a sudden it's 4.5, well, now you can't have horses. And if that's why you're buying it, that's going to be a problem. So things to think about. Termites, seller to provide new report. So you can just have the seller provide a termite report. I personally like to get my own, but that's just what it is. You can have the seller provide a guarantee. So this is the guarantee, all those sorts of things. And then the treat and repair, the guarantees, just different variations of termite related things. We could go deep into why one of these is better than another, but to be honest, it's very situationally specific, and you just want to look at what your situation is from that perspective. Utilities due diligence to begin. This is one of my favorites because it says that if these utilities are not on, then you can't, like, we're gonna go ahead and move binding, right? Buyer shall have the right to terminate the contract if these aren't on within 1 day of binding agreement or 2 days of binding agreement. And think about this, if the utilities aren't on and you know it's going to take a day or two, make sure you make your binding or your due diligence long enough to cover and give time for that. A contingency for receiving condominium questionnaire. If the property is a buyer is a condominium, then you have to get the questionnaire. And so this gives a timeline that goes with that. Again, just another example of a special step that might be useful for you.
Hey, Brett, can you back up for just a second? I'm sorry. On the
Sure.
special step 331,
Yeah.
I have a listing that's owned by a corporation, and right now all the utilities are disconnected and the house has been winterized. They had said that they'll have everything turned on once we go under contract so that the buyer can have a proper inspection performed. But my concern is they're in Florida, the seller, this corporation is probably going to take them several days to get the water turned on if they even know where to start for the county and everything else. What advice would you give? I don't know if I'm asking on my behalf to just make sure we keep this deal going once we get an offer and go under contract. Would you recommend having the buyer include special step 331 in the offer?
I would never recommending that a buyer's agent include anything on an offer to me as a seller.
Okay.
Pretty rarely is that going to be the case. What I'm going to do is make sure that I preemptively have that conversation with the
Buyer.
client, the seller, and
Okay.
say, okay, just be clear, like, looks like we're going to get under contract here. Can you guys start this process and get these utilities going? What's that going to be like? And just know that that's going to cause issues. Now, if your buyer's contract comes in with a 3-day due diligence, I question whether the agent's been to the property because obviously if there's no power, there's no like I mean, like that would be something that they should be talking to you about. Now, when the buyer's agent calls you and says, hey, as they're supposed to, and they should, when the buyer's agent calls the listing agent, which doesn't happen as much as it should, and says, well, what are anything that I need to know, putting together an offer, anything that the seller might want, anything that would be, things that would, whatever, right? However they want to phrase it. In that conversation, I would say, well, just remember that the utilities aren't on, and it's probably going to take a day or two to put those on, because that's just professional courtesy at that point. But directing them to put a special step of this kind is not in your client's necessarily best interest, but it is in your client's best interest to make sure that they're aware of like I was working with an agent the other day that they just their seller had a bunch of work done to the property prior to listing. And so, I was like, make sure that when you're talking to those buyer's agents, when they call, say, hey, did you notice that, in the disclosure that it says that the foundation was just repaired? Because I don't want them to freak out after they've gone on a contract that, oh my God, the foundation was repaired, there's some issue. No, actually, that's the point, is the issue was fixed. So it's fine. There was an issue, there isn't now. And so, just sometimes it's good to point those types of things out, in my opinion. So I think that would be my answer to your question.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I think this might be the last one. The appraisal determines the price and the right of the parties to terminate. This is a weird one, but I want to include this one because we are potentially going to be in a market at some point in the future. How vague can I be with that? We are potentially going to be in a market at some point in the future that this might play in, because appraisals are always historically based, right? And so as markets start to shift and turn, sometimes those appraisals don't keep up or they change. And so this is the right way to specifically say how that's going to happen if the property is going to be how it's going to go. It gives the seller the right to terminate if it doesn't reach their price, and it gives the buyer the right to terminate, and all the different things. So it's just an interesting approach that we haven't had to use in a long time, but you might be in a situation where you might need to Very strange property that maybe would be real hard to comp, might be something this might apply to. And that is the end of that. So let's jump to.
I have a quick question for you,
For
Brett.
sure.
Going back to the last
This one?
stipulation with the contingency for receiving condominium questionnaire.
Yep.
I know they've added that into the conventional loan document also.
So you're saying I'm repeating something that's already in the contract?
Yes, but also my question is, if you do a zero financial contingency on a conventional loan, are you still covered by that
Especially
stipulation?
if you put it in as a stipulation, you are, because the stipulation is going to override. We have to, when we get to the finance contingencies, we'll talk
Mhm.
about that. So please write that down and remember to bring that up.
Uh-huh.
But if you were to add this as a special stipulation, it's going to override the contingency, right? Because
Right.
it drives. So that's yes. The answer to that would be if you add this, yes. If it's in the contingency, we'll have to look at that language specifically.
Mhm.
But I think it's a separate paragraph, and so I'm not sure that it would get knocked out by 0 days. I think it has its own piece in there, but we'll have to look at how it's written.
Okay.
Because this one has a blank that you fill in for getting that questionnaire, right? And so that is different probably than what is in that language.
Right. I just personally had this come up because I did a zero financial contingency. So I added the stipulation to the purchase and sale, and we did 7 days from binding agreement. And then we just came up, today's our deadline, and lender still hasn't
Ugh.
received condo docs. So
Yeah.
need to extend it. So now I did an amendment to try to
Yeah.
keep this in there. So that was my question, whether or not they would
Yeah,
have
you want to
covered.
no, if this special stipulation is in your contract, which I think was a great move on your part, because a lot of times people see those 0 day finance contingencies as non-existent, but that's not necessarily true. But it does negate a lot of it. And so being able to have this with a specific number of days, especially with condos and trying to get the closing on time and all that kind of stuff, is a really good move on your part. So keep that up and stay on it. But again, the issue is that you don't have what are you going to do, right? Like it just means that it's protecting their earnest money, but you really want to close, not get your earnest money back, right? And so
Right.
it's just but keep pushing this out that they haven't gotten it, and then try to get that protection for your client.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Adam, what was the one that we were supposed to look at?
302.
Awesome. You actually wrote it down. Good deal. All right. So this looks the same. I thought they had modified this. In the event this amendment to address concerns, and we'll look at the amendment to address concerns because I think they have added some language on it as well, which is contrary to my comment about not repeating things in the contract, as Victoria also just pointed out. Some of these special stipulations have survived the ages. And a lot of them like address things that are the the contract itself, right? So just things to think about how those might work. But if you look through, like there's just, I mean, farm equipment, hunting rights, timber lease, what was that one? The qualify for preferential tax treatment, due diligence, larger payment, which I mean, I'm not sure why you would use that instead of just putting it in the contract, but it's there. The kick-out provision for due diligence, interesting as a listing agent. You could theoretically have a kick-out provision during due diligence. So a buyer is under contract and another buyer comes along and it's an offer that your seller wants to consider, you can give that buyer notice and they have X amount of time to provide additional money and whatever else this says they're going to do, and remove all contingencies. It's like the old school kick out where it just removes everything. So they're buying the house. There's no more negotiation. So, if you're a listing agent, and maybe this would have been a really useful step to use a few years ago when the market was ridiculous, and buyers were, sacrificing their firstborn to be able to get houses. This would be one that probably buyers would be willing to sign. In today's market, I think you might have a little trouble with this one, but you might not. I know agents that can get people to sign stuff that I would never sign. So it's up to you as to what you want to do to protect. This is protecting your client as the seller, because it's giving them the opportunity to accept a different offer or push this one into a no contingency offer. So that's an interesting one. Stop me if you see one that you think you want to talk about, because we went over because we chit-chatted too much at the beginning, but that's my fault. But you can see that there's just steps for so many different things: earnest monies, construction deposits, earnest money converted to non-refundable deposits, held until a specific time. There's just so much stuff in here. Bankruptcy contingencies, 1031 exchange stuff, if you're doing 1031 exchanges, interest rate fluctuations, loan assumptions, yada, yada, yada. All right, enough of all of that. Any last comments or questions about special stipulations? All right. Great session.
wait.
Thank you guys for coming. Kimberly, do you have a question?
I just wanted to know, you said that these videos are available somewhere. I can't find it.
Yeah, we're uploading them to the Remax Center YouTube channel. So we'll get Michelle to resend that out so you can get it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for asking. All right. Speaking of that, we have recorded this session and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel and made publicly available. So if you happen to have an agent that you're working with that maybe needs a little bit of help, please don't hesitate to forward them a link to it and let them see that maybe they too could improve their contracts, and help successfully protect their clients and also, of course, make your life easier. All right. Thank you guys for coming. We will see you next week, as we tackle the next section of the contracts, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Brett.
Brett?